When the HOA banned street parking during winter, I didn't argue. I built a plan. They thought their rules made them untouchable, but one machine changed everything. What started as a simple act of defiance turned into a war that no one in this neighborhood will ever forget. Snow fell heavier than usual that year. Thick, wet flakes coating the streets of Maplewood Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood ruled more by its HOA board than by the weather itself. Every driveway gleamed white, and every car was buried under a soft, cold prison. Inside his warm garage, Ethan Cole, a former Army mechanic turned contractor, wiped his hands on a towel and stared out the window. He had just finished plowing his driveway for the third time that week. The storm didn't bother him. He'd fought worse things overseas. What did bother him, though, was the letter taped to his mailbox. The envelope was the same shade of smug beige that every HOA notice came in. He already knew what it was about, and when he tore it open, his suspicion became rage. Effective. Immediately, it read, street parking during winter months is prohibited. Violators will be fined $150 per incident. Thank you for maintaining the beauty and safety of our community. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Brenda Marsh, HOA president. A retired teacher with too much time and too little empathy. Ethan's jaw clenched. Unbelievable, he muttered. His driveway barely fit one truck, and his son's Jeep had nowhere else to go. Their street was wide enough for fire trucks and snowplows, but Brenda and her board always needed to make examples. That night, Ethan stood at his window, watching as Brenda's husband, George, slowly drove his SUV around the cul-de-sac like a self-appointed security guard. He stopped in front of each house, flashlight in hand, writing down plate numbers of cars parked along the curb. The next morning, Ethan's son, Ryan, came in frustrated. "Dad, they ticketed my Jeep again, and I moved it last night." Ethan exhaled through his nose, calm but simmering. "All right. If they want a clean street, they'll get one." The plan for the next few days, Ethan observed. The HOA's excuse was always the same: street safety, snow accumulation, visibility. But he noticed something ironic. The HOA never actually plowed the street. Their maintenance contractor only cleared the main road leading to the clubhouse. The cul-de-sacs were left buried, and residents were left shoveling their own way out. That's when Ethan had an idea. He spent that evening scrolling through online listings until one ad made him stop and grin. A used Zamboni, the kind that resurfaces ice rinks. It was big, loud, ridiculous, and perfect. He called the seller immediately. "Yeah, it runs fine," the man said over the phone. "Needs a little tune-up, but it'll clear snow like butter." By dawn, Ethan was towing it home behind his truck. The neighbors watched in disbelief as he backed the machine into his driveway. Brenda, of course, was already peeking through her blinds. The first run. That evening, as snow started again, Ethan fired up the Zamboni. The engine roared to life, echoing through the quiet cul-de-sac like thunder. He drove it slowly out onto the street, the machine's broad blade scraping a perfect path through the snow. Within 15 minutes, the entire stretch in front of his house looked like a hockey rink, smooth, shiny, and spotless. The neighbors came out, laughing and cheering. "You're crazy, man!" one yelled. "Crazy works!" Ethan called back with a grin. But Brenda wasn't amused. She came marching down the sidewalk in her heavy coat and clipboard, snow crunching under her boots. "Ethan, you can't operate that thing on residential property," she snapped. Ethan cut the engine and leaned out. "Funny, you said no cars on the street. Didn't say anything about a Zamboni." Her face turned red. "This isn't a joke. You're in violation of—" He interrupted calmly. "Of what? Keeping the road clear? Helping the neighbors? Seems like I'm doing your job for you." The crowd chuckled. Brenda turned and stormed back to her house, furious. A new kind of war by the next morning. Photos of Ethan and his Zamboni had made their way onto the neighborhood Facebook group. Some called him a hero. Others, mostly Brenda's loyal followers, called him reckless. The HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting, but Ethan didn't care. Every time it snowed, he rolled out his Zamboni, cleared the street, and parked it right where his son's Jeep used to be, his new parking spot, perfectly legal under their own vague rules. But Ethan knew Brenda wasn't done yet. As the snow continued to fall and the community started to take sides, Maplewood Estates was no longer peaceful. It was divided between those who followed the HOA and those who followed Ethan's lead. And winter had only just begun. The next HOA meeting felt more like a trial than a discussion. The clubhouse was packed, every folding chair taken, neighbors whispering, phones recording, and the air thick with anticipation. At the front, Brenda. Marsh sat behind a plastic table draped in the HOA's blue banner, flanked by her loyal board members. To her right sat George, arms crossed, still pretending to be head of community security. Ethan walked in late, boots thudding against the polished floor. He wore his work jacket, the one with grease stains on the sleeve, the same one that made Brenda visibly cringe. He didn't sit down. Instead, he leaned against the back wall, calm and unreadable. Brenda adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "Tonight's meeting is called to address a recent disturbance," she began, glancing at the papers in front of her. "It has come to our attention that one resident, Mr. Ethan Cole, has been operating industrial equipment, a Zamboni of all things, on HOA property." A few neighbors snickered. Brenda shot them a sharp look before continuing. "This poses both a safety hazard and a violation of community bylaws. The board will be discussing possible fines and disciplinary action." Ethan raised a hand lazily. "Mind if I speak?" "You'll have 2 minutes," she said stiffly. He walked forward, his presence commanding the room without effort. "Look, I don't care about your bylaws. You banned street parking, fine, but the snow was piling up and no one did a thing. I cleared the road. I made it safe. If that's a violation, maybe you need better rules." Murmurs filled the room. Half the residents nodded in agreement. The other half avoided eye contact. Brenda's voice sharpened. "Safety isn't your responsibility, Mr. Cole. It's ours." "Then maybe you should start acting like it," Ethan replied, his tone even but cutting. For a moment, silence filled the clubhouse, the kind that crackles before a storm. Brenda's cheeks turned red and she scribbled something furiously in her notepad. "This meeting is over," she snapped. "Expect a notice from the board by morning." Ethan smiled slightly. "Can't wait." The retaliation. By sunrise, Ethan's. Mailbox had a new letter, printed, laminated, and taped right to the front. Notice of non-compliance. You are hereby fined $500 for operating unauthorized equipment and causing a public disturbance. Additional violations will result in legal action. Ethan folded the paper neatly, tucked it into his jacket pocket, and laughed to himself. Later that day, Brenda hired a towing company to inspect the street, but the driver refused to touch the Zamboni. "Lady, that thing weighs 8,000 pounds. You want it gone, you move it," he said before driving off. The humiliation spread fast. Neighbors whispered about it in the local cafe, and memes of Brenda standing beside the Zamboni started popping up online. Someone even edited her face onto a hockey referee's body with the caption, "HOA trying to call penalties on the ice." Ethan didn't post anything himself. He didn't have to. The internet was doing the work for him. The escalation that night, Brenda made her next move. Around midnight, Ethan was awakened by flashing lights outside his house. He stepped out onto his porch to see 2 local police cruisers parked in front of the Zamboni. A young officer approached him. "Sir, we received a report about an unregistered vehicle blocking the road." Ethan crossed his arms. "That's funny. The road looks pretty clear to me." The officer looked uncomfortable. I was told to have it moved." "By who?" "Someone from your HOA." Ethan smiled and nodded. "Yeah, I figured. Tell you what, this isn't a car. It's classified as maintenance equipment. You can check the DMV records if you'd like. The officer hesitated, then sighed. You're right, actually. It's not in the system. Look, we're just following up on a call. You're fine. As the cruisers left, Ethan noticed a figure standing in the shadows. Brenda, holding her phone, recording everything. When their eyes met, she turned and disappeared into the darkness. Ethan muttered under his breath. She's losing it. The neighborhood divide. The next few weeks turned Maplewood Estates into a cold war zone. Some neighbors started joining Ethan in silent rebellion. A few parked snowblowers in their driveways as a tribute. Others began leaving friendly notes on his door. Keep fighting the good fight. Finally, someone stood up to her. Meanwhile, Brenda doubled down. She printed new flyers titled The Dangers of Negligent Neighbors, warning residents about rogue machinery and reckless defiance. Her followers, mostly retirees who saw her as some suburban general, started patrolling the neighborhood at night, taking photos of anyone who even looked like they were breaking rules. Ethan didn't engage. He just kept doing what he always did, keeping his stretch of road clean, peaceful, and ironically the safest part of the entire HOA. The breaking point one afternoon, a blizzard rolled through. It was the worst snowstorm in a decade. The HOA maintenance trucks were stuck on the main road and are. Winter refused to loosen its grip on Maplewood Estates. Every morning brought new snow, and every night carried the quiet tension of a neighborhood divided between rebellion and control. Brenda Marsh, once untouchable queen of the HOA, now sat alone at her kitchen table, a mug of cold coffee untouched beside her. Her laptop screen glowed with angry comments on the community's Facebook page. Brenda should step down. Ethan saved us when the HOA didn't. Who finds a man for helping? Each line stung like frostbite. Her power, her sense of order, was slipping through her fingers. She needed to take back control. That night, she came up with a plan, one that would end Ethan's rebellion once and for all. The setup 2 days later, Ethan received another letter. But this one wasn't a fine, it was an invitation. Mandatory board hearing, February 12th, attendance required. Discussion regarding community safety violations and misuse of property. Ethan smirked. She's not done yet, he muttered, tossing the letter on the counter. Ryan, his son, frowned. You going? Yeah, Ethan said. Let's finish this properly. The night of the hearing, the clubhouse was unusually crowded. The parking lot was full and the air inside buzzed with curiosity. At the front, Brenda sat flanked by her remaining loyal board members, but even they looked uneasy. Ethan walked in, Zamboni keys still hanging from his belt. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Brenda stood. Mr. Cole, thank you for coming. This hearing concerns repeated violations of HOA policy, including unauthorized use of heavy machinery and endangerment of property. Ethan leaned against a chair. Endangerment? You mean clearing the street so people could get to the hospital? Brenda's tone hardened. You have ignored every notice we've sent. You've made a mockery of this community. Ethan raised an eyebrow. No, Brenda. You've done that all by yourself. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Brenda's voice trembled with anger. For your continued defiance, the board has voted to suspend your membership privileges and file for legal action. But before she could continue, a voice from the crowd interrupted. Hold on. Legal action? Against who exactly? The guy who plowed all our streets when you didn't. It was Mrs. Henderson, one of Brenda's oldest supporters. Others nodded in agreement. Another voice joined in. We pay HOA fees for snow removal. Where did that money go, Brenda? The room erupted. The truth comes out, Ethan stayed silent as the chaos unfolded. Brenda tried to shout over the noise, but no one was listening. Finally, Ethan spoke, calm, steady, but cutting through the noise like a blade. You all want answers? Let's talk about those fees. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folder. Inside were printed records, public documents he'd requested from the county office the week before. According to city records, he said, the HOA's snow removal contract was canceled 3 months before winter started. but residents were still charged for it. Gasps filled the room. Brenda's face went pale. That money, Ethan continued, was redirected to a community improvement fund, which, funny enough, paid for new landscaping outside the HOA office and for Brenda's husband's security patrol vehicle. Every pair of eyes in the room turned to Brenda. She froze. That's a misinterpretation? She stammered. Ethan's voice stayed cool. You can check the invoices yourself. It's all public record now. Brenda's composure cracked. You had no right to— I had every right, Ethan cut in. Because you stopped being a leader the moment you started treating this neighborhood like your kingdom. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that comes just before a fall. The fall of the HOA. Queen by the end of the week. The entire board had called for a re-election. Brenda resigned before the vote even happened. George removed his magnetic HOA security sign from his SUV. The marsh name that once carried power now carried mockery. Ethan didn't celebrate. He didn't post online. He just went back to work, fixing his truck, helping neighbors shovel driveways, and keeping to himself. But Maplewood Estates had changed. The new board, made up of younger residents and working parents, rewrote the winter parking rules, eliminated unnecessary fines, and even created a volunteer snow team. They asked Ethan to lead it. He declined politely. I'm done with politics, he said, but I'll lend a hand when the snow hits. The final snowfall weeks later, the last snowstorm of the season arrived. The air was still, the streets silent. As dawn broke, Ethan fired up his Zamboni one last time. The engine purred, steady and familiar. He drove slowly down the same street where the war had started months ago, the place that had seen confrontation, rebellion, and change. Neighbors waved from their windows. Kids ran outside to watch the ice machine guy clear the road. At the end of the street, Brenda's house sat dark and quiet. The blinds were drawn, her driveway empty. For a moment, Ethan paused, then smiled faintly. He didn't feel anger anymore, only peace. He turned the Zamboni around and made one final pass, carving a perfect, clean path through the snow. The machine's lights glowed against the winter haze, cutting through the cold like a beacon of quiet defiance. As he parked it in his driveway, he looked around at the freshly cleared street, calm, open, and silent. For the first time in a long while, Maplewood Estates actually felt like a neighborhood again. Ethan switched off the engine and whispered to himself, sometimes you don't fight power with noise. You fight it by doing what's right. And with that, the Zamboni saga came to an end. Epilogue Spring came early that year. The snow melted, the air warmed, and the once bitter neighbors began talking again. One afternoon, Ethan received a letter, not beige, not threatening, but handwritten. Thank you, from everyone who remembers what community really means. He smiled and pinned it to his workshop wall. Outside, the Zamboni sat quietly under a tarp, its engine silent, but its legend very much alive, because in Maplewood Estates, people would always remember the winter the HOA banned parking, and one man fought back with a Zamboni.